welcome to the deep dive. You know, something that really resonates with so many of us is, well, how our brains work and change over time.
Absolutely, especially as we move into that 50, 60, 70, even 80 age range.
Right. And we've heard from quite a few of you listeners who are keen to understand these shifts, maybe for yourselves, maybe for parents or friends.
People looking for practical ways to stay sharp, stay connected, especially when, memory might feel a little less reliable sometimes.
Exactly. So that's our focus for this deep dive. Practical strategies. We're looking at better listening, better communication.
And we're drawing on some really insightful perspectives, expert ideas to help navigate this.
Our mission today really is to explore how we can use more of our brain, this idea of the whole brain, to support people experiencing memory challenges.
Yeah, how to keep them engaged, keep those vital connections strong. It's so important.
And we're going to tackle some specific things you've asked about, like what do you do when someone seems to zone out?
Or the frustration that can bubble up when you have to repeat things. That's a tough one.
Definitely. And also, when traditional memory aids, like maybe taking notes, just aren't cutting it or feel awkward.
So lots to unpack there.
Okay, so let's start with this concept. You mentioned whole brain listening. I know Jim Kwik is someone who advocates for this kind of approach.
He is, yeah. And the core idea really is moving beyond just passively hearing.
It's not just auditory input.
Exactly. It's about actively firing up different parts of your brain, attention, visualization, emotion, maybe to really grasp and, importantly, retain what's being said.
Makes sense. And to make it more concrete, Kwik uses this acronym, right? HEAR. HEAR.
That's the one. It's a neat little framework for active listening. Breaks it down.
So HEAR, what do they stand for?
Okay, so H is for halt. Basically, stop everything else. Give your full attention.
Physically stop multitasking. Mentally stop your internal chatter.
Pretty much. Then E is empathy. Really try to step into the speaker's shoes, understand their perspective, their feelings.
Okay, halt, empathy, then A.
A is anticipate it. It's about being curious, thinking ahead a little, being genuinely interested in what they're going to say next, not interrupting, but being ready to receive.
Like leaning in mentally.
Yeah, exactly. And finally, R is review. Just taking a moment mentally to summarize or reflect on what you've just heard helps lock it in.
Halt, empathy, anticipate, review, hear. Got it.
So the question then becomes, how do we apply this, maybe adapt this, when we're talking with someone facing memory issues?
Right, which brings us perfectly to our first listener question. Someone wrote, my aunt has early stage memory challenges, often seems to zone out.
Okay.
She nods, but you can tell she's not really following. We tried talking slower, simpler words. Doesn't seem to help much.
That's a really common scenario.
So the question is, how can we adapt something like hear, or just this whole brain idea, when basic attention seems like the hurdle?
It's a great question because it shows the standard advice isn't always enough. Let's think about halt and hear.
Stopping ourselves.
Yes, but maybe it's more than that here. Perhaps it's about finding ways to gently halt or pause the interaction or the environment briefly to help her refocus.
So not just me stopping talking, but creating a pause for her.
Exactly. Maybe a light touch on the arm, saying her name softly. Something gentle to break the zoning out moment without being jarring.
Okay, that's a subtle shift. What about empathy in this situation?
Oh, empathy is huge here. When someone zones out, it's almost never on purpose, right? There could be loads of reasons. Sensory overload, is the TV on? Too many people talking? Is the pace still too fast, even with simple words?
So trying to really imagine what it feels like for her in that moment.
Precisely. Considering the whole sensory experience, not just the cognitive load, it helps us adjust better.
That makes a lot of sense. Looking beyond the memory label and anticipate. How does that fit when attention is flickering?
Well, anticipate here could mean being proactive, thinking, okay, where might she lose the thread?
Planning for it almost.
Sort of, like breaking information down into even smaller bites. One single idea per sentence, maybe. Lots of pauses.
Keeping it super digestible.
Yeah. And maybe anticipating points of confusion based on past chats. You could even start by saying, okay, I just want to tell you about one quick thing. Just setting the stage clearly.
Orienting her first. Okay. And review. If someone's zoning out, a big recap probably won't work.
No, definitely not a formal review. But you could adapt it into tiny, gentle check-ins. Like after sharing one small piece of info, maybe just pausing and saying, does that bit make sense? Or how does that sound? Very light, low pressure.
Just enough to kind of gauge and reinforce without it feeling like a test.
Exactly. It's about keeping that connection going moment by moment.
Now, this same listener had a follow-up idea, which I thought was really interesting. They asked, is there anything we can do together? Maybe using music or visuals to help re-engage her mind.
Oh, I love that question. That lines up perfectly with engaging the whole brain, doesn't it?
It really does.
Music is incredibly powerful, especially familiar music from someone's past.
It taps into different pathways, right? More emotional ones?
Absolutely. It can bypass some of the strained language circuits and hit those deep-seated emotional and memory networks. It can boost mood, improve focus.
So maybe putting on an old favorite album while you chat, or even singing the song together.
Yes. Shared experiences like that can be wonderful. Less pressure, more connection.
And visuals. They mentioned visuals, too.
Also brilliant. Simple pictures, photos, gestures, even just pointing to an object you're talking about.
Gives the brain another way in.
Exactly. Another sensory hook for understanding and recall. Talking about lunch, point to the food, discussing a walk, maybe show a picture of the park.
Making it multisensory, bringing the conversation to life a bit more.
Precisely. And the key really is keeping it light. Playful, even. No pressure.
The goal isn't a memory quiz.
Not at all. It's about finding enjoyable ways to connect and communicate. Short, focused interactions using these aids can make a real difference.
Okay, that's really helpful. Let's shift gears a bit to another common challenge. Our second listener question touches on this.
Good.
My dad was always super sharp, the family problem solver. Now, when I need to repeat instructions, he gets really frustrated, defensive.
Yes, the I'm not a child reaction. Very common.
Exactly that. So the question is, how do we balance clear communication with preserving his dignity, especially when repetition feels necessary but triggers that defensiveness?
This is so important and incredibly sensitive. That frustration, that defensiveness, it often comes from a place of grief, grief over the changes they're experiencing.
Loss of their old self-image.
Exactly. Their identity is tied up in being sharp, competent. So here, that empathy part of here is absolutely critical. We have to try and grasp the emotional weight of this for them.
So it's more than just saying, I get that you're frustrated.
Much more. It's about validating their past competence while acknowledging the present challenge. Maybe saying something like, Dad, I know you've always been the one to figure things out first, and I can only imagine how frustrating this must feel right now.
Acknowledging who they were and still are, in a sense.
Yes. It honors their history. And then, tactically, avoid direct repetition, if possible.
What do you do instead?
Rephrase. Try coming at it from a different angle. Instead of saying the same sentence again, maybe say, let me try explaining that differently. Or, did I make that clear? Sometimes I jump ahead.
Subtly taking the blame for the miscommunication onto yourself.
Exactly. It deflects the focus from their memory and preserves their sense of competence. It's a small shift in language, but it can have a big impact on their reaction.
That's really smart. Anything else in terms of validating feelings?
Just acknowledging their intelligence generally. Dad, I know this might seem simple, and you're obviously incredibly smart, but sometimes the steps get jumbled. Frame it with respect for their history.
Always circling back to respect and dignity.
It has to be the foundation.
Now, related to these emotional reactions, we also had someone ask about Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor's work, specifically her 4 characters of the brain model.
Yes, Dr. Taylor. Her books, Whole Brain Living and My Stroke of Insight, are fascinating.
Can that model offer any insights here with these kinds of emotional responses like frustration or defensiveness?
I think it can offer a really helpful perspective. It's not about diagnosing, obviously, but about understanding.
So remind us, what's the basic idea of the 4 characters?
Very simply, Dr. Taylor, as a neuroscientist, suggests we can think about distinct personalities or modes of being associated with different parts of our brain's hemispheres, like a thinking character, an emotional character, a grounded character, a playful character, roughly speaking.
Not literal separate people, but different ways our brain processes and reacts.
Exactly, different modes we operate in. And understanding this might help us see why someone with memory changes reacts the way they do.
How so?
Well, for instance, if stress or confusion makes their more, say, character 2, the cautious, emotional part of the past more dominant in that moment, they might be much more likely to react with fear, frustration, or defensiveness.
So seeing that defensiveness not just as stubbornness, but maybe as a brain character,
Yes.
taking the lead in response to feeling threatened or confused.
Precisely. It gives us a framework for thinking, okay, this isn't just dad being difficult. This might be his brain responding from a place of heightened emotion or insecurity right now.
Which allows us, again, to respond with more empathy and less reactivity ourselves.
Exactly. It depersonalizes the reaction a bit and helps us tailor our approach with more understanding and compassion. It's another tool for empathy.
That's a really interesting lens. Okay, let's tackle our final listener question. This one is about memory aids.
Right.
We've tried getting my cousin, she's 68, some mild cognitive changes to take notes, but she misplaces the notebook, forgets to check it, and honestly feels a bit embarrassed.
The stigma is real. Note-taking can feel very clinical or like highlighting a deficit.
Totally. So the question is, are there more creative whole brain ways to help her remember things without making her feel self-conscious? And they specifically asked about voice notes, drawing, or storytelling.
Wonderful suggestions. Absolutely. Those are fantastic alternatives that tap into different brain strengths and can feel much more natural and less medicalized.
Let's break those down. Voice notes first. How might that work better?
Well, straight away, it removes the potential physical challenge or mental block of writing.
Good point.
And listening back to information in your own voice or a familiar loved one's voice can be less intimidating and potentially more effective for recall than reading dry notes.
It feels more personal, maybe.
Exactly. And speaking and listening engage different neural pathways than writing and reading. It offers another route for the information to stick.
Okay, cool. What about drawing or visual journaling? That sounds quite creative.
It really is. This taps into visual processing and spatial memory, which can be surprisingly robust. Instead of a written to-do list, she could draw simple icons for each task.
Like a little picture of a pill bottle for medication time.
Perfect. Or a shopping cart for groceries. It makes it more like a puzzle or a visual game, less like homework. The act of drawing itself can aid memory.
And it feels less like I have to write this down because I'll forget and more like I'm just doodling my day.
Precisely. It reframes the activity, reducing potential embarrassment and engaging creativity.
Love that. And the last suggestion, storytelling. How does that work as a memory aid?
Storytelling is perhaps one of the most powerful whole brain memory techniques we have. Our brains are wired for narrative.
We remember stories better than lists of facts.
Absolutely. Stories connect information to emotions, to characters, to sequences of events. So instead of just stating an instruction, you weave it into a tiny narrative.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Instead of it just, remember the doctor's appointment is Tuesday at 10. You might say, okay, so remember next Tuesday morning, after we have our usual cup of tea, we'll head out together like a little adventure to see Dr. Smith around 10. Maybe we can grab a coffee afterwards.
Embedding the key info, Tuesday, 10 a.m., Dr. Smith, into a relatable little sequence with emotional anchors. Tea, adventure, coffee.
Exactly. It makes it more vivid, more engaging, and connects it to existing routines or pleasant anticipations, making it much more likely to be recalled.
Those are such practical, creative ideas.
Right.
Way beyond just a notepad.
It's all about finding what resonates with the individual and leverages their remaining strengths in a dignified way.
So as we start to wrap up this deep dive, if you had to distill the main takeaways for our listeners dealing with these memory challenges, what would they be?
I think number one is the crucial shift towards really active, deeply empathetic listening, truly trying to understand the world from their perspective.
Seeing beyond the symptom to the person.
Absolutely. Second, flexibility is key. Being willing to adapt your communication style constantly. What works today might not work tomorrow.
Letting go of rigid approaches.
Right. And third, embracing these diverse whole brain strategies we've talked about: music, visuals, storytelling, different ways of reviewing or reminding. Move beyond just words.
It's about honoring their dignity, preserving that connection, and fostering understanding above all else.
That's the heart of it. Maintaining connection and preserving dignity.
It really underscores that navigating these changes requires a lot of patience, doesn't it? And empathy and that creative willingness to adapt.
It does. But the payoff maintaining those meaningful connections is huge. Engaging the whole brain, both yours and theirs, can really enrich your interactions and support their well-being.
So maybe a final thought for you, the listener, to take away from this.
Yeah, think about just one of these techniques we've discussed today. Maybe using a bit more visual support, or trying that gentle rephrasing instead of direct repetition, or even just pausing more consciously.
How might trying just one small thing this week subtly change an interaction you have with someone facing these challenges.
Give it a try. Observe what happens, how it feels for both of you. It might be quite revealing.
And remember, this conversation is really just scratching the surface. There's so much more to explore about our amazing brains and how we connect.
Definitely. Hopefully this deep dive has given you some useful starting points and perhaps sparked some curiosity to explore further.